On the night of March 12, 2020, Louisville, Kentucky seemed calm from above. The city's streets were lit by yellow lamps, stretching in neat grids toward the dark horizon. The Ohio River reflected the glow of bridges and the hum of distant traffic. To most, it was just another quiet evening. People returned home from work. Children were tucked into bed, and the city prepared to sleep. But somewhere in those city blocks, a police operation was quietly forming. An operation that would soon reach a small apartment on Springfield Drive. An apartment belonging to a young woman named Breonna Taylor. What began as a routine night in Louisville was about to become a turning point, not only for the people who lived there, but for the entire nation. Breonna Taylor was 26 years old. She worked as an emergency room technician, helping save lives in the fast-paced environment of hospital care. Those who knew her describe her as someone who carried a calm presence even in the middle of chaos. She was ambitious, caring, and had a way of making people feel safe. Breonna grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan before moving to Louisville, where she attended Western High School. After graduating, she pursued a career in healthcare, first becoming an emergency medical technician, then working in hospital emergency rooms. Friends remember her as reliable, a listener, someone who would offer a ride home at 2 a.m. without hesitation. She had dreams of becoming a registered nurse. She talked about buying her own home and traveling the world. In photos, she often smiled with an expression that seemed to say, "Everything will be all right." On March 12, 2020, she shared her apartment with her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker. They had plans for the future, but those plans would never come to pass. At the same time Breonna was working long shifts at the hospital, the Louisville Metro Police Department was running a months-long investigation into a suspected drug trafficking network. Their focus was on two men, Jamarcus Glover and Adrian Walker. No relation to Kenneth Walker. Detectives believed Glover was using various addresses around the city to store and distribute drugs. One of those addresses was linked to Breonna Taylor's apartment. The connection came from a claim that Glover had used her address to receive packages. Detectives also said they had seen Glover visiting her apartment in the past. There was no evidence that Breonna herself was involved in any illegal activity, but the address appeared in their files. On March 12th, a judge signed a no-knock search warrant for several properties, including Breonna Taylor's apartment. A no-knock warrant meant police could enter without announcing themselves, a tactic designed to prevent suspects from destroying evidence. It was controversial even then, criticized by many for the danger it posed to both officers and residents. For the team assigned to Breonna's apartment, this was supposed to be one part of a larger coordinated operation. For Breonna and Kenneth, it would be a night they never saw coming. March 12th passed like many other days for Breonna Taylor. She finished her shift at the hospital, exchanged a few text messages with friends, and returned home to her apartment at the Springfield Drive complex. The building was quiet that evening, its hallways dim and still under the yellow glow of ceiling lights. Inside, Breonna and Kenneth Walker settled in for the night. They watched television, shared conversation, and eventually went to bed. It was a calm, ordinary evening. Nothing about it suggested that police officers would soon be at their door. Outside, across the city, multiple police units were mobilizing. Some officers met in briefing rooms to review the operation plans. Others were already parked near targeted addresses, waiting for the signal to move in. Breonna and Kenneth were unaware that their home was on that list. Shortly after midnight, unmarked police vehicles arrived near Breonna's apartment complex. The officers were part of the Louisville Metro Police Department's narcotics unit. The plan was to execute the search warrant swiftly, as part of a series of raids happening around the same time at different locations. In total, there were at least 7 officers assigned to Breonna's address. They wore plain clothes and tactical gear, carrying flashlights and firearms. They walked through the quiet parking lot toward Building 13, their boots echoing softly against the pavement. The operation required precision, but what the officers didn't know was that the target of their investigation, Jamarcus Glover, was not inside that apartment. In fact, he was already in police custody at another location. The hallway leading to Breonna's door was silent. The officers prepared themselves for entry. At approximately 12:40 a.m. on March 13, 2020, the officers reached the door of apartment 4. According to police accounts, they knocked several times and announced themselves as law enforcement. According to Kenneth Walker, he and Breonna heard loud banging, but did not hear any announcement identifying the officers. Kenneth, a licensed gun owner, believed it might be a break-in. He retrieved his firearm from a nearby drawer. Moments later, the battering ram struck the door. The frame splintered and the door swung open. From Kenneth's perspective, unknown intruders were forcing their way inside. In the confusion and fear of that moment, he fired a single shot toward the doorway. The bullet struck Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly in the leg. The officers responded instantly with gunfire. Multiple rounds were fired into the apartment. Breonna, standing in the hallway, was struck several times. She collapsed to the floor. The gunfire stopped, leaving a sudden, heavy silence. Kenneth shouted Breonna's name. She did not respond. Blood spread across the floor where she lay. Kenneth called 911 in a desperate attempt to get help. In the recorded call, his voice is panicked, repeating that someone had broken into their home and shot his girlfriend. Police officers entered fully and secured the apartment. They detained Kenneth and led him outside. Breonna remained on the floor. No drugs were found in the apartment. By the time emergency medical services arrived, it was too late. Breonna Taylor was pronounced dead at the scene. She was 26 years old. In the hours after the shooting, Louisville Metro Police prepared their first public statements. The initial report described the incident as an exchange of gunfire during a lawful search warrant. It stated that an officer had been injured and that a woman inside the apartment had been killed. The details were brief, leaving many questions unanswered. There was no mention of Breonna's occupation, her lack of criminal record, or the fact that the primary suspect in the investigation was already in custody. The official incident report would later draw criticism for what it left out. It listed Breonna Taylor's injuries as none, despite her having been shot multiple times. The public was given little clarity about what had happened inside the apartment that night. After the shooting, Kenneth Walker was taken into custody and charged with the attempted murder of a police officer. He told investigators repeatedly that he did not know the intruders were police officers. He said it acted in self-defense, fearing for his and Breonna's lives. Walker's account of hearing loud banging, but no clear identification from the officers, would become a central point of dispute in the months that followed. Police insisted they had announced themselves several times before forcing entry. Some neighbors later reported hearing the knocking, but not the announcement of police. The conflicting statements created an immediate divide in the narrative, one that would grow wider as the case gained national attention. News of the shooting reached Breonna's family in the early morning hours. Her mother, Tamika Palmer, received a phone call saying there had been an incident involving her daughter. At first, the details were unclear. She was told Breonna had been shot, but was still alive. When she arrived at the scene, the area was taped off, and she was not allowed inside. Officers would not give her specific answers. Hours later, she learned the truth. Breonna had died in her own home. For Tamika Palmer, the shock was immediate and overwhelming. Her daughter had been full of life just a day before, and now she was gone without warning. At first, Breonna Taylor's death received little media attention outside Louisville. The story was overshadowed by the growing COVID-19 pandemic, which dominated news coverage in March 2020. Local outlets ran short articles based largely on police statements. They described the incident as part of a drug investigation and included few personal details about Breonna herself. In the absence of wider coverage, many in the community only heard about the shooting through word of mouth. The early framing of the story focused more on the police operation than on the young woman who had been killed. As days passed, Breonna's family began asking questions. Why was her apartment targeted? Why did police enter in the middle of the night? And why did they fire so many rounds into the home of someone with no criminal record? Tamika Palmer and other relatives sought legal representation. They began piecing together what had happened, speaking to neighbors, reviewing court documents, and pushing for more information from the police department. The more they learned, the more it became clear that there were serious gaps in the official account. Those gaps would soon draw the attention of activists, journalists, and eventually the wider nation. In April 2020, nearly a month after the shooting, Breonna Taylor's story began appearing on social media. Friends, family, and local activists shared her photograph, describing her as a hard-working EMT who had dreamed of becoming a nurse. They wrote about the circumstances of her death, how she was unarmed in her own home, and how no drugs had been found in the apartment. The post began to circulate beyond Louisville. People started using the hashtag Breonna Taylor to draw attention to her case. What had begun as a quiet local tragedy was beginning to reach people across the United States. By May 2020, the killing of Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia and the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis had sparked widespread protests against racial injustice and police violence. In that climate, Breonna Taylor's name began appearing on protest signs, in news broadcasts, and in political speeches. Her story resonated deeply. A young black woman, working to save lives during a pandemic, killed during a police raid that found no evidence of the crime it was meant to uncover. Celebrities, athletes, and public figures spoke out. The call for justice grew louder. In late May, audio of Kenneth Walker's 911 call was released. In it, his voice trembled with fear and confusion. He told the dispatcher, "Somebody kicked in the door and shot my girlfriend." The call underscored what Walker had said all along, that he had no idea the intruders were police officers. Public reaction to the audio was swift. It raised further doubts about the official narrative and added urgency to calls for a deeper investigation. Louisville became one of the focal points of the nationwide protest movement in the summer of 2020. Demonstrators gathered outside city buildings, chanting Breonna Taylor's name. They carried photographs of her, often paired with the words, "Say her name." The protests were mostly peaceful, but tensions sometimes ran high. Marches filled the streets, and vigils were held to remember Breonna's life. Her mother and other family members addressed crowds, urging them to keep speaking out until there was accountability. As public pressure mounted, Louisville officials began reviewing police procedures. The city council passed a law banning no-knock warrants, naming it Breonna's Law in her honor. The new measure required officers to knock and announce themselves before entering a residence, and to wear body cameras during such operations. For Breonna's family, this was a meaningful change, but it was not the same as justice for her death. The officers involved in the raid had not been charged with killing her. In September 2020, a Kentucky grand jury reviewed evidence in the case. Only one officer, Brett Hankison, was indicted, not for killing Breonna Taylor, but for wanton endangerment because bullets he fired entered a neighboring apartment. No charges were brought against the officers for Breonna's death. When the decision was announced, outrage spread quickly. Protests erupted in multiple cities. For many, the ruling was another example of the justice system failing to hold police accountable. Breonna's name continued to be chanted in streets and written on signs across the country. When news broke that no officer would be charged directly for Breonna Taylor's death, anger erupted across Louisville and beyond. Demonstrators poured into the streets, some holding signs with Breonna's face framed by the words, "Justice for Breonna." Others lit candles in quiet vigils, their flames flickering in the evening wind. The city braced for unrest. In some areas, clashes broke out between police and protesters. National Guard units were deployed to assist local law enforcement. The sense of disappointment was heavy. For many, the grand jury decision confirmed a painful truth, that the justice system rarely held police accountable in such cases. In September 2020, just days before the grand jury announcement, The city of Louisville had agreed to a $12 million settlement with Breonna Taylor's family. The settlement was one of the largest ever paid by the city in a police misconduct case. Alongside the payment, the city promised several police reforms, better oversight of search warrants, an early warning system to identify problem officers, and incentives for officers to live within the communities they served. For Breonna's mother, Tamika Palmer, the settlement was a recognition of wrongdoing, but it was not justice. She made it clear that the fight for criminal accountability would continue. In 2021, the U.S. Department of Justice announced it would open a civil rights investigation into the Louisville Metro Police Department. Federal officials said they would examine whether officers engage in a pattern or practice of violating constitutional rights, including during the raid that killed Breonna Taylor. This announcement brought cautious hope to activists and community members. It suggested that even if local prosecutors had declined to bring charges, the federal government might still hold someone accountable. In August 2022, the Department of Justice announced federal charges against 4 current and former Louisville police officers. Prosecutors alleged that 2 of the officers had falsified information on the search warrant application used to justify entering Breonna Taylor's home. They were accused of falsely claiming that a postal inspector had verified suspicious packages being sent to her apartment, a statement investigators later determined was untrue. Other charges included obstruction and civil rights violations. For many, these developments marked the first time anyone faced serious legal consequences connected to the raid. Over the next year, court proceedings unfolded. Some of the officers reached plea deals, admitting to certain charges in exchange for reduced sentences. Others continued to fight the allegations in court. While these federal cases represented a measure of accountability, they also revealed how long and difficult the legal process could be. For Breonna's family, every hearing was a reminder of the night she was killed and of the years spent fighting for justice. Years after her death, Breonna Taylor's name is still spoken in conversations about policing and reform. Murals of her face appear on walls in cities across America. Her story is taught in classrooms, discussed in legal forums, and remembered at rallies. The law banning no-knock warrants in Louisville remains in place, and similar measures have been adopted in other states. For many, these changes are a testament to the impact her life and her death had on the nation. Yet for her family and loved ones, no policy reform can replace the person they lost. Breonna Taylor was more than a symbol. She was a daughter, a friend, and a young woman with dreams for the future. Breonna Taylor's death, along with other high-profile cases, sparked national debates about police tactics, particularly the use of no-knock warrants. In Congress, lawmakers proposed bills aimed at restricting or banning such warrants altogether. While not all proposals passed, the conversations they generated forced many police departments to reconsider their policies. Across the country, departments quietly reviewed how they conducted raids, how they applied for warrants, and how they trained officers for high-risk operations. Some of these changes were direct results of public pressure. Others came from a growing awareness that police actions carried consequences not only for suspects, but for entire communities. Breonna Taylor's name became part of a larger list, a list of Black Americans killed in encounters with law enforcement. This broader context was not new, but her story reached millions who may not have followed similar cases in the past. It brought attention to patterns, disproportionate use of force, insufficient oversight, and the ways the justice system often shielded officers from prosecution. For activists, Breonna's story was both unique and representative. Unique because of the particular details of her life and the night of the raid. Representative because it fit into a history of systemic inequities. Documentaries, podcasts, and investigative reports examined her case in detail, ensuring that her story would remain part of the national memory. For Tamika Palmer, Breonna's mother, the years since her daughter's death have been marked by public speaking, advocacy, and grief. She has stood before crowds of thousands, telling them about the young woman Breonna was, and about the night that changed everything. She has also faced the private reality of loss, Quiet evenings when the house feels too silent. Holidays with an empty chair at the table. Birthdays that pass without the person who should be there to celebrate. Tamika has said that while she never sought the spotlight, she continues to speak out because she believes her daughter's life can still change the world. As of today, federal cases connected to the raid remain in the court system, with appeals and legal motions still unfolding. Each development is closely watched by the media and the public. For some, these proceedings are about more than the individuals on trial. They are about setting a precedent. They ask whether officers who falsify information or misuse their authority will face meaningful consequences. The outcome of these cases will shape how future raids are planned and how communities view the police departments sworn to protect them. In Louisville, there are places where Breonna's name is painted on walls, where flowers and handwritten notes are left beneath her picture. Her friends still post photos of her on social media, laughing in a restaurant, posing with family, dressed in her hospital scrubs after a long shift. These reminders are not only for the public, but for those who knew her personally. They keep alive the memory of the person behind the headlines, a young woman who loved music, who enjoyed spending time with friends, and who cared deeply about helping others. The story of Breonna Taylor is both deeply personal and profoundly public. It is about one life, cut short in a matter of seconds, and about the larger forces that allowed it to happen. Her death became a rallying point in a year defined by calls for justice and change. It sparked protests, inspired legislation, and forced difficult conversations across the country. But it also left a family without their daughter, a community without a friend, and a nation still struggling to answer the question, how do we ensure this never happens again? Breonna Taylor's name will be remembered, not just as part of a movement, but as a reminder of the cost of inaction and of the work that remains.